Shukreshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttamasloke Bhakti Bhagavati Nandini. So, we are continuing our study of the third canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 8, text 22.
I did 22.
You did 22? No, we're having a rerun. I'm sorry. When Maharaj and I collaborated on it, he told me 22.
Yeah, I did.
But as Srila Prabhupada says, we can study a verse a month. So we do the math of 18,000 verses times 1 month. I apologize, but I'm sure there's a lot that can be covered here. Kalena, Soja, Purushayushavi, Kalena Soja, Purushayushavi, Pavitra, Yogina, Virudha, Bodha, Pavitra Yogina Vidhu Bodha, Vayam, Tat, Antar, Hidaye, Bhavatam, Vayam, Tadatar, Hidaye, Bhavatam, Apashyata, Pasyata, Yam, Na, Purvam, Apasyata, Pasyata, Yam, Na, Purvam, Kalena Soja, Purushaya Savi, Pavitra Yogena Vidudha Bodha, Swayam Taratta Hidaye Bhavatam, Apasyata Pasyata Yam Na Purvam, Kalena Soja Purushaya Savi, Pavitra Yogena Vidudha Bodha, Swayam Taranta Hidaye Bhavatam, Apasyata Pasyata Yam Na Purvam, Kalena Soja Purushaya Savi, Pavitra Yogena Vidudha Bodha, Swayam Taranta Hidaye Bhavatam, Apasyata Pasyata Yam Na Purvam. Please chant.
Kalena Soja Purushayushavi, Sovrasta Yogena Virudha Bodha, Swayam Taranta Hridaye Bhavatam, Apashyata Pasyata Yam Na Purvam,
Kalena Soja Purushaya Savi, Pavitra Calling out in due course of time. He, Aja, the self-born, Brahma, Purusha, Ayusha, by the duration of his age, Abhipavitra, being engaged, Yogina, in meditation, Vibhuddha, developed, Bodha, intelligence, Svayam, automatically, Tat anta hirdaye, in the heart, Avavatam, manifested, Apashyata, saw, Apashyata, did see, Yat, which, Na, not, Purvam, before. Purport, translation by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. At the end of Brahma's 100 years, when his meditation was complete, he developed the required knowledge, and as a result, he could see in his head the Supreme within himself, whom he could not see before with the greatest endeavor. The Supreme Lord can be experienced only through the process of devotional service, and not by one's personal endeavor in mental speculation. The age of Brahma is calculated in terms of Divya years, which are distinct from the solar years of human beings. The Divya years are calculated in Bhagavad Gita 8:17. Sahasra Yuga Paryantam Aharya Brahmano Vidhu. Brahma's one day is equal to 1,000 times the aggregate of the 4 yugas, calculated to be 4,300,000 years. On that basis, Brahma meditated for 100 celestial years before he could understand the supreme cause of all causes. And then he wrote the Brahma Samhita, which is approved and recognized by Lord Chaitanya, and in which he sings, Govinda Maripusham Tamaham Pashami. One has to wait for the mercy of the Lord before one can either render service unto him or know him as he is. Chaitanya Manobhistam Sabitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Dalanti Svavarantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Bharakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sakrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Sadhadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vidamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagapate Gopisa Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namosute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vindavanishwari Vishabhanusude Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakapatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhayevacha Patitanam Pavadevyo Vaishnavevyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Please repeat, at the end of Brahma's 100 years, when his was complete.
Meditation was complete.
He developed the required knowledge,
He developed the required knowledge.
and as a result,
As a result,
he could see in his head the Supreme within himself,
seeing his master,
whom he could not see before,
whom he could not see before,
with the greatest endeavor.
the greatest endeavor.
So,
This one says heart.
pardon me?
This version says heart. See on the screen.
Oh, I might have an older version. That's probably a
Is
correction.
yours the original books?
Pardon me?
Is that the original books? What you have?
So, there's a lot of different interesting points in this purport. And one that kind of jumped out at me after I actually prepared the lecture was the issue that how long it took Lord Brahma to meditate and be able to see the Lord within his heart. It was quite a while. And this Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur, in his book Sri Bhakti Loka, Illuminations on Bhakti, he addresses this in his chapter in Doya, Patience. For the practitioner of devotional service, Doya, patience is extremely necessary. Those who possess the quality of Doya are called Dhira, sober. Due to lack of this quality, men become restless. Those who are impatient cannot do any work. By the quality of Doya, a practitioner controls first himself and then the whole world. In the first verse of the Upadeshamrita, the symptoms of Doya are explained. Vachavegam, manasakrodavegam. A sober person who can tolerate the urge to speak, the mind's demands, the actions of anger, and the urges of the tongue, belly, and genitals, is qualified to make disciples all over the world. There are 6 types of urges, namely the urge of speech, mind, anger, belly, tongue, and genitals. With a desire to speak more, a person becomes talkative. If speech is not regulated, then enmity arises from talking about others. To speak uselessly is the business of a fool, but out of a desire to unnecessarily engage in speech, the materialist always wastes time and faces so many distresses. Pious people observe manu, art, or science in order to get rid of this disturbance. That is why the rishis have made provisions for observing various styles like mona art. The practitioners of devotional service should not speak unnecessarily. If you do not have to speak unnecessarily, better to keep quiet. If you have to speak unnecessarily, better to keep quiet. Besides topics regarding Krishna, all other topics are unnecessary. But to think about the subjects favorable to devotional service is not unnecessary. Therefore, devotees should speak only on topics about Lord Hari, or those favorable to such topics. All of the topics will be counted in that category of the urge to speak. One who is able to control the urge to speak is a sober person. So this is a little preview that we're giving, a little insight that after our austerities and following this process seriously, we will see the Lord in our heart. And but when Lord Brahma, who was foremost of entities in this material world, so foremost that he was born from a lotus flower, he appeared from a lotus flower, but there was nothing else there. But Brahma, being the advanced soul that he is, he started looking around immediately, trying to understand who am I? Why am I here? What is my purpose? Who is God? Where is God? So he started this great endeavor, as Prabhupada describes, in searching all over the lotus flower, even down the stem, finding nothing, until he heard the answer to this path, and that was tapasya. So this is a sign of a living entity's being actually human. There's so many living entities in human bodies, but they don't live as humans. Their only interest is eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. And consequently, their interests are no different than the animals. So when someone gets some interest in trying to answer these very important questions in life, who am I? Why am I here? What is my purpose? Who is God? Then they're really given an onslaught of so many spiritual practices are available today in the West, in the East, North, South, everywhere. So many spiritual practices. There's churches and temples and synagogues and mosques and yoga societies and classes and so many things. So it's so easily for one to get distracted. And this is where our gratitude becomes heightened, because that we found this process due to the mercy of Super Soul. And due to the desire, they did a study of people and they asked them, what denomination do you belong to? And most people said they didn't belong to any denomination. And then they asked the same people, do you consider yourself spiritual? And the people said, yes. So they're looking out there, they're looking without any particular guidance. And Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Ye yatamam prabhajante tamstaya bhajamyaham mama partante manusya partha sargashaha. As they surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. Everyone follows my path in all respects, O son of Pritha. If we are serious about awakening our eternal love in our hearts, it's going to involve tapasya. And that tapasya actually comes from controlling the mind and senses. Most processes don't even address this issue. They say, do what feels good. But controlling the mind, which we've all experienced, is not a particularly good feeling type of thing. And so Krishna explains this to Arjuna. And he explains that what is called renunciation, you should know to be the same as yoga, or linking oneself with the Supreme, O son of Pandu. For one can never become a yogi unless he renounces the desire for sense gratification. One must deliver himself with the help of his mind and not degrade himself. The mind is the friend of the conditioned soul and his enemy as well. For him who has conquered the mind is the best of friends, but for one who has failed to do so, his mind will remain the greatest enemy. For one who has conquered the mind, the super soul is already reached, for he has attained tranquility. To such a man, happiness and distress, heat and cold, honor and dishonor are all the same. In the stage of perfection called trance or samadhi, one's mind is completely restrained from material mental activities by practice of yoga. This perfection is characterized by one's ability to see the self by the pure mind and to relish and rejoice in the self. In that joyous state, one is situated in boundless, transcendental happiness, realized through transcendental senses. Established thus, one never departs from the truth, and upon gaining this, he thinks there's no greater gain. Being situated in such a position, one is never shaken, even in the midst of great difficulty. This indeed is an actual freedom from all miseries arising from material contact. But Arjuna couldn't accept this. A few minutes earlier, he was ready to give up his Gandiva bow and head towards the forest to meditate. And this is actually the process of any yoga process. And so he rejected it, saying, oh, Madhusudan, this system of yoga, which you have summarized, appears impractical and unendurable to me, for the mind is restless and unsteady. For the mind is restless, turbulent, obstinate, and very strong, O Krishna. And to endure, subdue it, I think is more difficult than controlling the wind. Krishna agreed, yes. O mighty armed Kunti, it is undoubtedly very difficult to curb the restless mind, but it is possible by suitable practice and detachment. For one whose mind is unbridled, self-realization is difficult work, but he whose mind is controlled and who strives by appropriate means is assured of success. That is God's opinion. So, we've been provided the suitable practice. We've been given this by the Jagat Guru. And so we have the recommended process. All it takes now is our endeavor, our sincerely striving to make the effort. And what Srila Prabhupada accomplished in the world is simply amazing, completely amazing. He took from society one of the most rebellious, difficult parts, the youth. And he had them give up illicit sex, meat eating, intoxication, gambling, and drugs. I think I said it once, twice. And it was so amazing because the mantra of the youth at that time was drugs, sex, and rock and roll. And he was able to turn them into Vaishnavas, to actually raise them to the highest standard. And Srila Prabhupada explains, when you sell something of real value, not so many people will buy. And it's like jewelry. You know, you could go to the mall and to this place called Claire's, I think, and there's lots and lots of cheap plastic jewelry in that store. And it's full of people buying cheap plastic jewelry. But if you go down a few doors to the real jewelry store where they have quality diamonds, you won't see so many people inside. And so this process is not cheap. It is a very serious process that takes serious endeavor. One who can control his mind, success is assured. Senses which are controlled by the mind can carry away a man of discrimination who is endeavoring to control them. In the 6th canto of the Srimad Bhagawatam, Sukadeva, he says that a hunter who captured a wild, dangerous animal should be very alert because the animal may escape. And worse than that, the animal may turn upon him and attack him. And so our minds are like tigers, they're like wild animals. There was this show in Las Vegas some years ago that they used tigers in the show. And these two men, they did the show. And you know, people pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars to go to these shows. And during one of these shows, a tiger attacked one of these men and killed him right in front of all these people who pay hundreds of dollars for one ticket. And the mind will turn on, and his partner, surviving partner, said, "Oh, the tiger didn't mean to kill him. He was being affectionate." That's absurd, right? Tigers have cubs in their mouths. They don't cause a scratch on the cubs. So it was absurd that the tiger was living in Vegas, coming from Siberia, a very cold climate, living in Las Vegas and performing every night. That was hellish condition for the tiger. So anyway, the mind is dangerous, and it should be treated with caution, because it has this attraction and aversion thing that goes on, and it tricks us. It can be very tricky, making us think we are so important, we are so elevated. And Srila Rupa Goswami helps us with this, with giving us these two basic principles of devotional service, and that is accepting everything as favorable for Krishna consciousness and rejecting anything that's unfavorable for Krishna consciousness. But we see examples throughout the scriptures of great personalities, of falling to the weakness of the mind. We see even Lord Brahma when he stole the cows and calves of Krishna. We see it even with Lord Indra Vishwamrita, Sabari Muni. All these great personalities fell down. What to say of us? Maya works through the mind. The writer Emerson said a very interesting thing. He said the mind is such an amazing thing. It can make us, he can make hell into heaven or heaven into hell. So maybe Maya can only be successful when it enters the mind. We can't see it. It's so subtle. It's powerful and subtle. We can't see it, we can't touch it, we can't smell it, we can't taste it. It's more subtle than air or ether. It's due to the mind alone that the conditioned soul is trapped in the cycle of repeated birth and death. It's so powerful that due to the mind, a man could take his next birth as a dog, a king could take his next birth as a fish, or a demigod could take his next birth as a worm in the stool. So powerful. If we can't control the mind, we can't control the senses. In that picture in Bhagavad Gita, we have it in the LA Museum. It's such a great display. It's got this chariot being pulled by these 5 wild horses. And on the breastplate of the horses is a symbol of each of our senses. The reins are described as the mind, and the driver is the intelligence. So we need to fix our intelligence in Krishna. We all know the challenges of dealing with the mind, and we don't need convincing. It's just chanting sincerely. This is the mercy of Haridas Thakur. And Maharaj was so kind yesterday to explain the glories of Haridas Thakur. And he went through so many tests, and he didn't fail on one of them. He was born in such a degraded family, and he was ostracized by society. He was beaten in 22 marketplaces, spit upon, dragged, kicked. What a horrible, embarrassing thing. And then when his abusers became distressed, he voluntarily wanted to give up his life. So amazing. This is how Haridas Thakur could constantly chant in the mood of compassion. This is why he's Namacharya, because he chanted in a humble state of mind. Jai Shri So Maharaj Bharat is another example of an advanced soul who was degraded by his mind. He was practically at the level of praying. A great emperor who was perfected so much of his spiritual life. He gave up his empire, gave up his beautiful family, and went to the forest to finish his spiritual life, his practice. And he was just sitting on the bank of the Gandharki, chanting his mantras, but apparently he was distracted easily by a doe who came to drink water at this river. And she heard the roar of a lion. And on hearing this roar, she went to cross the river, and upon doing this, in distress, she gave birth to a baby fawn. And she ran off. The fawn is running down the river, and Bart thinks he should save this deer. It's a little helpless deer. We should save it. So he did. But then he became completely obsessed with this deer, nurturing it, raising it, letting it pollute his offerings, letting it distract him in his practice. And it's caused him madness. If we let things distract us in our practice, it could cause us madness. And so, as he fell down, little by little, because Maya is tricky, she's very sneaky how she sneaks in, and we're able to give ourselves so many justifications for our nonsense. But it came to the point where the deer just naturally roamed off, as he was a wild animal. They roamed off to look for sweet grass. And it got late, and Bart became so obsessed. Where's my deer? Where's my deer? He went running off in the night, looking for his deer. So much so, he ran off a cliff. And in the state of dying, the deer returned. The deer returned and came up to him. And as Maharaj, the great emperor of the world, is gazing at the deer, he left his body. What kind of body did he take?
Dear.
He did. But he was given one benediction, is that he didn't forget his last life. And he remembered it the next life. So his next life, he was very, very cautious about letting things distract him. So our chanting is so important and so powerful, more powerful than the mind. So we have to learn how to take shelter of the holy name. Srila Prabhupada says when Maya attacks us, chant loudly. And in that way, we're chanting louder than the Maya is in our mind. This is how we get free from Maya. We learn to take shelter of the holy name. We understand it is no different than Krishna. It has all his opulences, all his power, all his potency and beauty. And like Srila Prabhupada said, we chant like a child crying for its mother. We're chanting to be engaged in pure devotional service. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jai. So I'll end here. Any questions, additions? Correction? Jai. Oh, glory to